The MIW Disruptive podcast is sponsored by Mentorch. Mentorch is a social development network for mentorship. Go to mentorch.app to seek knowledge and leave a legacy.
Welcome to the Disruptive podcast by Minority Innovation Weekend. Minority Innovation Weekend is a weekend summit dedicated to aiding minority innovators launch tech-focused startups, exploring emerging technologies, and showcasing tech startups that have a minority founder or co-founder. During each episode, we will discuss innovation, news about tech startup, as well as the startup ecosystem, and interview people of color throughout the startup ecosystem. All right, welcome to the MIW Disruptive Podcast, hosted by Sir Walter and Jerome. Today, we got an expert, the man in cybersecurity. He's a professor at the United States Naval Academy. I am talking about Dane Brown. How are you?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here with you gentlemen today.
Glad to have you.
Where are you from originally, Dane?
I actually grew up in Maryland. Local.
Wow, that's awesome. What sparked your interest in cybersecurity or engineering in general?
I've been into it since I was young. I had this kind of innate interest in math and problem solving. I love that. I love reading those books and doing logic puzzles and things like that. So I always was interested in challenging myself, right? My mom had high standards and expectations for me too. So I was in the gifted and talented programs and accelerated math since I was as young as I can remember. And then when I got into middle and high school, it was great because in Maryland we have programs like MESA and also NSBE Junior. I was in those. I knew that I wanted to be an engineer. I knew I wanted to create things and solve hard problems and really be immersed in those kind of challenges. So that's kind of where some of my interest in STEM came from, right? And I didn't really have a lot of family who was in the field doing engineering and things like that. This might sound silly, but I even when I was a young impressionable kid, watching shows like Family Matters and seeing Steve Urkel and whatnot, it just making all these cool inventions and whatnot. It made me feel, okay and comfortable about being, a geeky black guy that, didn't do the same things as everybody else, but, was, able to kind of tap into that awesome power. And then even when I got older, watching movies like, Hackers and The Matrix, which are still, up at the top for me or made me realize, man, you could really use that understanding to take control of the computers and these devices all around you. And I said, I definitely want to be a part of that.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Yeah, like both of us are engineers as well, so we can definitely relate to the geeky side of it as well.
That's
right.
And yeah, Matrix, definitely. I feel like right now we're living in the Matrix right now.
Right. Yeah.
But let's talk a little bit about cybersecurity now.
Sure.
So what are the top cyber risks a company typically faces?
So a company can face, a variety of cyber risk, right? And there's lists about these that kind of get published every year, so you can see what the trends are. And if you look at, even some more recent ones, there's some attacks that you're always going to see, right? These days, web attacks are among the most prevalent. Why is that? Because your website, your web presence is public, intentionally. So that's what everyone has an interface to. So if your web interface is not as secure as it can possibly be, right? You now have open vulnerabilities to the world that basically anyone can exploit. you're asking them to come to your site and interact with you, but you know, if it's someone that's malicious, that has bad intentions, then you really need to be safeguarding your site to the maximum extent possible. You also have attacks like phishing, which never go away. You know, over email. It's one of those things that's tough because this is not just the security of your technology. This is, you know, security of your people, right? What are they going to click? Yes, there's the fact that these are coming through your filter, but you know, there's countless cases of where people have gone into the trash folder, right, to find malware in a phishing attack and click on it anyway. So you know, that's a really tough one, right? And if you now again you click that email, you fall victim to that phishing attempt, you're now making a connection to the bad guy, right, on their behalf and inviting them in. So especially bad news there. Some other ones, denial of service is big. If you're a business, you know, again, like having your website up, you make money by having that uptime, being present and available for your clients, people who are visiting. And so denial of service is something that can just shut down that your presence online and have a huge negative impact on your business. So if people are able to get things like, you know, botnets and have distributed denial of service attacks, they could keep you down and in some cases be unrecoverable and shut your business down. Data breaches are on the rise. Obviously, we keep hearing, you know, more and more records being stolen from breaches that were data is being stored that, you know, in some cases people weren't aware that data was stored, or that it wasn't protected as well as they would have expected. You know, this is just kind of one of the things we have to be aware of as we allow companies, third parties to have our data, to be controlling it, and you know, we have to hold them to a reasonable standard of protecting it on our behalf. Ransomware is also huge these days, right? I think this is probably the last one I'll just briefly mention here, but we're probably, especially locally, we're hearing lots of cases of you know, whether it be a phishing attack or something else, ransomware getting introduced into a company or an organization, where now they will encrypt all of your files. That's what ransomware does, and they will hold that key to decrypt it, ransom from you, and make you pay. You know, it used to be things like you know, just a few Bitcoins, when that wasn't really worth much, but now, you know, Bitcoins are worth a lot, and they might ask for ransoms that might total in the millions of dollars if you have a large enough organization and it was a targeted attack. So those are things that are you certainly want to avoid if you're a company, and certainly be prepared for.
This year, Dane, it's I guess it's Dr. Dane.
It's all right.
All right, this year it's 2020, and this is the election season.
Mm-hmm.
And generally speaking, how secure are like voting machines?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Obviously, that'll have a lot of attention here as we get close to election season, or in election season. And the truth is, it's such a hard question to answer because of the diversity of the machines in play, right? We don't have this national standard for, you know, what machine is used. And so you go to different places, you find different machines, different implementations, you know, and so that's one thing that makes it difficult. There's also the fact that, you know, if you're using these machines, if it's fully electronic voting like this, they're computers and they can be compromised, right? Which is obviously the worry with this. And even when there are ways for a voter to verify that their vote was recorded properly, people aren't always doing that and taking advantage and making sure that it was done properly. So, you know, a lot of experts are still recommending using hand-marked ballots for security, right? Because even though that the tallying is more cumbersome, it's more secure overall. But, you know, if you really look at things overall, right, you would see that, you know, voter fraud itself is super duper rare. And so, and I'm encouraged to see that there's more attention being given to things like, voter suppression and whatnot happening that really account for more votes not being counted because they were never even got to be cast.
Definitely, definitely. So also last year, Baltimore City also suffered an attack by hackers using ransomware. I think the variant was Robin Hood. So what are some preventative steps that could have been possibly used to prevent such an invasive attack?
Yeah, sure. So ransomware, I think I just introduced ransomware a little bit, and super important here because obviously Baltimore just recently suffered an attack like this. So what we need to be able to do is have a plan in your company in case something like this does occur, right? You should be backing up regularly. You should you should have a plan for restoring, right, in a timely fashion, whether and realizing what data was lost and what it is that you are able to restore. And you should know if you're going to pay the ransom, right? This impact was bad, like in Baltimore, right? Lots of PCs and servers were inoperable, right? It affected real estate transactions, public health, utilities even. So yeah, companies need to have good, even the fundamentals, using proper network and data segmentation, making sure that, if attackers are able to gain a foothold somewhere, that it doesn't allow them to take control of your entire company, your entire organization, or a distributed organization like the city of Baltimore, right? So yeah, you want to definitely minimize your attack surface and the damage that can be done in any one particular place. On top of that, you got to have the standard good recommendations. You should have good patch management. You should be doing monitoring of your system and logs, right? Generally you have the logs turned on, but somebody's actually got to look at them and determine if any evil is taking place. And unfortunately, a lot of breaches and compromises are happening to companies, and they don't know about it until many months later. So in many cases, if you have the resources to implement it, then some of these endpoint protection systems that are out there can help to a certain degree to detect the signatures of the most common attacks that are out there and block them at the source before they occur. But yeah, all the common security advice, patch management, system logging and monitoring still is in play. If we're talking about ransomware, it's also important for us to recognize how it's changing, because more recently, it's not just ransomware where they're holding your data, encrypting it, and demanding that key for you for money. They're also doing additional extortion, right? So if your data is held ransom, and let's say you had backups and you're able to restore right away, and you wouldn't have to pay the ransom. Well, that's not what they want. They still want money somehow. So what they're doing is instead of just encrypting your data right away, they are exfiltrating that data, right? They're stealing the data so that they have a copy. And so now not only can they hold the encryption key at ransom from you to make you pay in that way, but they can also say, hey, unless you pay us, we're going to release this sensitive data that your company is holding. And which obviously would look bad and in many cases be worth you paying to have that privacy upheld.
Okay, this is a two-part question.
Okay.
What is reverse engineering, and is it considered a red team activity or a blue team activity?
Oh, okay. Great question. All right, so reverse engineering, first of all, is I would define it as it's taking something apart to see how it ticks. Right? So anyone with expertise in a process, right, whether that process is something like manufacturing or construction, all the way to software development or computer architecture and design, that expertise can allow you to analyze a product there, right, and to be able to divine clues about how it was produced. Right. And so is that a red team or a blue team activity? It can be both, right? If you have malware in your system introduced to your networks, you're probably going to want to use reverse engineering for the blue team to figure out, okay, well, what is the effect that this has? How does this thing work, and how can I protect my systems from it, right? And obviously on the red team, if this is your vector into another system, right, you might want to reverse engineer that software, that product, and figure out what the vulnerabilities are, right? How can you best exploit them to gain a foothold into that network, right? So how can you do reverse engineering? Again, there's kind of naive ways of approaching this, and some things are just not that complex. So there are automated analysis techniques that are available. Some are as easy as just launching a website. There's some websites that you can drop a file into, an executable, and it'll tell you all the data about it, what kind of things it does, what kind of files it opens. It might be well known already. But for things that are more custom, you might need to do some of the analysis on your own, right? So there's dynamic analysis for that. You might be able to put something in a sandboxed, right, that doesn't affect anything else, virtual machine, attach a debugger to it, and kind of be able to step through the code and see, what exactly does it do? What is it reaching out to? And beyond that, there's also static analysis, which is just you at the basic level, actually you analyzing the code itself, right? Not running it, but just seeing, hey, what's in this, what libraries are loaded, and things like that, to be able to get a feel for how does this work and what is it going to do. Reverse engineering for me, why is reverse engineering something that I'm particularly interested in? When I was a kid, this is one of the other parts of me getting into cybersecurity when I was younger, and this is going to date me here. I had like the first Nintendo and the Game Boy and everything like that, right? Playing those original Mario games and whatnot. And there was this product at that time, I don't know if you remember it, called like the Game Genie, right? And so this was something you could actually that went between the console and your game, right? And it would be able to insert code, right? It would actually, I didn't know this as a kid, but it really changes what things are in memory. So you could give Mario 1,000 lives, right? Or you could always have the star and be invincible all the time, right? And as a kid, I was just like awestruck. I was like, I would love to know.
I never knew about that. You're teaching me something right now. I never knew about that.
You didn't know about the Game Genie?
No, I didn't.
You didn't know about the Game Genie.
I didn't know about it, but okay.
or Game Shark.
Or Game Shark, yeah. I think that was the other one. Yeah. So, so those kind of devices, and I was like, man, that's just awesome. And so all these years later, at being a computer engineering, having done that, now knowing what that means, right? We're changing bits in RAM and that's kind of what's being done as a reverse engineer. But where's that happening now in our society in ways that it's still relevant? Well, if you look at things like things from tractors, right? There's big issues with John Deere and people who are using the tractors who want to be able to repair them themselves without going through their process and paying exorbitant fees and having to wait a long time. People want to have this kind of right to reverse engineer what's their property, what they own. And be able to make changes, right? And maybe be able to install your own firmware so that hardware, that machine runs the way you want, right? Apple has had issues with this. Third-party repair has been a really sensitive with them. I've seen some good people that obviously Apple's are really popular devices, so that a lot of people know how to get into the internals of them, and Apple's frequently fighting with them. And things like repairing your screen or the fingerprint sensor has a lot of times they've had it's been alleged that they've put things in their code to detect that kind of stuff and to disable access to some of their features. Even more recently, there's news in the last couple of weeks about Tesla, right? They're having a cat and mouse game with this Canadian company that made the Boost 50, right? So instead of you paying Tesla for their software upgrades, this is a device you could install in your car, and it would unlock some of those features and give you more horsepower and And so, Tesla released a software update then that detected that and said, hey, we know this is what you're doing, and we may disable this at some point. And then that company came back, right? And so they're like, so they released another module, and they actually called it the "nice try" module, right? So they're trying to poke at Tesla, like they saying they definitely can't detect this one. So there's this back and forth, right? If you know these fundamentals and know how these programs work and interact with the computer, you have this just amazing power.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So, about to get into a little bit about encryption. So, AES, Advanced Encryption Standard, there are numerous amounts of possible key combinations. So, what's the likelihood that someone would be able to break this encryption?
Absolutely agree. I'm glad you brought that up, right? I mean, the number of possible keys out there are just astronomical. But that itself is what the security involved comes from, right? That large number, because all security is breakable, right? But it's a matter of time, right? If someone's able to try every possible key of those combinations, one of them will be the right key, and they will be able to decrypt your information, right? But if that number is really large and they can only try so many per second, and it takes thousands and thousands of years for them to probabilistically find your key, well, then you're probably okay. Yes, they could get lucky and find your key within a day or two. That's that's how probability works, but that's super duper unlikely. So yeah, so you're the way we guarantee security is by making that process of having to guess that key take as long as possible. After that, though, it comes down to implementation, right? Because AES as an algorithm itself is pretty simple, right? You can go on Wikipedia and see the algorithm for AES, and you could write an implementation in an afternoon that will actually perform AES encryption for you, right? But how strong is that implementation? Do you know what to use? For instance, AES has multiple modes. So there is ECB, electronic codebook mode. And so if you don't know this, right, if a company is just telling you, hey, your data is secure because it's AES encrypted, but you don't ask what mode they're using, right, and they're using electronic codebook mode, then it's actually not uniquely encrypting every piece of data that comes in. And so there's actually a really famous picture that you can find online of the Linux Penguin being encrypted with ECB encryption. And even though that the image itself is encrypted, you can basically still see the outline of the penguin and still tell what it was, right? And that's basically what it's doing to your data, right? It's anything that's known is being encrypted the same way multiple times. So you should be able to know the difference between ECB mode and CBC or cipher block chaining mode, and what the weaknesses are there, because there's ways that you can have a bit flipped, right? You should know how to establish your initialization vector. Are you using a nonce and not reusing it? Are you in counter mode, Galois counter mode? So I'm not going to go through all the litany of this. The point of this is to understand, right? Encryption is hard, right? And implementing it properly takes some knowledge and expertise. And what the best advice that security experts will tell you is never roll your own. Don't think that you can go out and just create your own encryption for something and it's going to be secure. The guarantees that we have with something like AES is that it's been around for decades. Mathematicians have been hammering on it, trying to find weaknesses of it, and publicly, as far as we know, they've only been able to find just minor cracks that don't appreciably affect our security.
All right, this is a hypothetical scenario here.
Okay.
Say, for instance, if I'm planning to launch a brand new IoT device, something with internet access, are there some design considerations I should think about, even if it's just a microcontroller and some switches inside of my product?
Yeah, definitely. Right. If you're working with IoT, there are a lot of questions you should ask as a designer, and especially if you're thinking about security, right? You want to know, what's inside that device, right? What kind of microcontroller is it? right? What is it capable of, right? Where's the logic? Where's the main program taking place, right? Is the logic on the device locally, or is it out in the cloud somewhere, right? With something that it's communicating with, right? Where is the data stored? Is it your data or is it that vendor's data, right? So who is it talking to, right? Are you, is this something that's just on your local network and just talking to your local devices, or is it reaching out to the internet, right? Is it making requests to the cloud all the time, and is someone tracking that at every point, right? And holding on to your data and maybe selling it to third parties, right? Giving them indications to your pattern of life and how you're using things within your network or within your business. You want to know things like, does it use UPnP? Do you guys know what that is?
Yeah. No, what's that?
No.
The universal plug and play.
Okay.
Right? So that is something that will, even though you have this device like within your network behind your firewall, if you have universal plug and play enabled, it will poke holes right through your firewall and let whatever cloud server that it'd be talking to communicate with it directly. So it would ask to do that, right? And so now that's an open hole into your network that you may not even be aware of, right? Most people have no idea what UPnP is, but all these devices that you install in your network, whether they're video game consoles or personal assistants or IoT devices, they may be using that to make the setup easier for you, right? But what's the cost of that ease of setup is you're losing control of your security. So that's one of the things I always turn off first right away is disable that UPnP at your network level and find other ways for these to communicate where they only have that controlled outbound access. There's also, you have to think about things like, is your device going to use IP version 4 or IP version 6? Because the simplest way of just recognize the difference is IP version 4, there's only about 4 billion IP addresses that are out there, and we've kind of exhausted that a while back. If you just think about an IP address for every person on the planet, or think about how many devices you have and how many you would need, right? 4 billion just doesn't get it done, right? But IPv6 has many more. I'm not even going to kind of mention the number because it's outrageous, right? It's 2 to the 128th possibilities. And as far as security goes there, right, there's a lot of, I think there's some questions that need to be answered research-wise, because one of the intentions is that now, since we can give every single one of these devices an IP address, we should make it publicly accessible, right? So now, instead of you having one of these devices that's at least protected by being behind your network firewall, it's behind your NATed or network address translated IPv4 address, it's going to have its own IPv6 address and possibly be, and anyone on the internet can contact it, and you need to now have better local security for the device itself, right? You want to know for the device, can you encrypt that data, right? Can you decrypt the data that's being stored on the device or being transmitted by the device? If so, can you do it securely? So this is interesting, right? So when we're talking about IoT devices, a lot of times we're talking about this segment of kind of low resource embedded devices, right? These are not like some big production server that you're going to stand up, right? This is, in many cases, it's really cheap parts. So why would they put in a secure cryptographic coprocessor along with this product if they're trying to sell it at the minimum price? So a lot of times they've made a design decision that don't even allow it to be as secure as it could be. So those are kind of things that I would be thinking about if I wanted to design an embedded IoT device.
Very interesting, very interesting. So I have two questions. So
Sure.
One question is kind of related to the question that Sir Walter posed. Like, when you're configuring your own home personal router, what are some of the things that you typically disable? I know you just said UPnP. And then number two is how do you protect sensitive information handled by third-party vendors?
Okay, yeah. So yeah, the main one is UPnP, right? And then I would say for your router, right? Generally it's got a built-in firewall, and you want to you want to make sure that it has the basic firewall security, which is generally that it doesn't allow any new connection from the outside, right? At the very basics, that's what you want. And so whenever you are making a connection, it's from something inside your network that is trying to connect out, right? So whether that's your web browser on your computer, you trying to go to google.com, that's something you indicated that you wanted to have as a connection, right? Or whether it's one of your IoT devices in your network, right? It's going to reach out to whatever it wants to connect to. That's something you want to make sure of, right? That regardless of what happens, right? And UPnP is kind of one of the big workarounds for it, that only outgoing connections are the new connections that can be made. As far as information handled by third-party vendors, I would say, especially if it's sensitive information, right, you need to take a risk assessment of what kind of data it is, right? But if possible, encrypt it first, right? So encrypt it before you send it to that third party. You need to determine how much you can trust them, and what kind of exposure you have if that third party gets breached at any point in time. So if you can, keep things local and protected on your own, but yeah, at that very least, have the awareness of the risk you're accepting by turning it over to that third party. And you should expect issues, right? So I think we're beyond the point where you as a business owner can say, I'm gonna start things up, and I'm gonna hope that we're secure. I'm gonna hope we never get breached or anything like that. You should expect that it's going to happen, right? And you got to plan for it and figure out how you can be resilient in the face of some kind of disaster happening.
A few years ago, maybe more than a few years ago, I read about how thousands of Axis IP security cameras were all configured with default settings. These cameras were basically accessible by anyone with a web browser and a little know-how. The wireless router companies have gotten better over the years, but are there other product segments or industries that could do better with security by default principle?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. But we have to ask ourselves, what would be their incentive to adopt a security by default principle, right? In many cases, like for instance, with a free service, right? And you've probably heard this phrase before, right? If you're not paying for the service, then you are the product, right? What does it benefit them to do to go above and beyond to protect your privacy by default? One of my favorite security guys that I listen to terms this Steve Gibson. He calls this the tyranny of the default, right? Which is this, I think research has shown, like over the years, that despite the fact that you can go in and configure settings and configure devices that you get to be more secure, only maybe 15% of people do that, right? 85% of people, at least, are going to just accept things as they are, right? You're going to take that device from the store and just plug it in and turn it on, and if it works, great. All right, or you sign up for a website or some kind of service, right? You log in and you just take it as is, right? This has been an issue over the years with, for instance, think about Facebook, right? Everyone's talking about, oh, Facebook is terrible with privacy. And sure, there's some truth to that, right? It's a social network, so you are expecting to go and be giving up certain amounts of your data, but they do have privacy controls, but they're all what's known as opt-in, right? It's not the default to be more private. But you have to do that extra step of work of like hitting the settings button, right? And you need to go through and now spend the time reading what the different settings are and thinking about what they all mean and making decisions about how they best apply for you. And certainly, on Facebook, you could be secure, right? You could lock down everything and have no one get any information about you. But then, what's the point of being on there, right? How social, how much you're participating in that social network at that point, right? So if that's what you want, maybe you want to take a think about if you even want to be on a social network like Facebook. But so the same kind of thing is true with business owners, right? We got to check our default settings, right? When you get a device, when you have a service, you got to click that settings button, right? You need to read the manual, set things up and configure them, right? Because the defaults are going to make security and privacy, almost all cases, those are opt-in things. You're going to have to turn those on. Not only do companies kind of make money off of those things being more open, but I think what I've heard in a lot of cases is it even reduces tech support. It just makes things easier to operate, and then people aren't calling all the time for tech support saying, hey, why isn't this thing working, right? If I just leave everything open and I leave it easy, then people are going to accept that and just be happy that it works. But we can't accept that for businesses, unfortunately, right? If your devices are insecure, people are going to find it. People are going to find it. I don't know if you guys have heard of this this website called Shodan before.
No.
Oh, I haven't heard of. What's it about?
Yeah. So and this has been around for many years, right? And it's just one. There's more like it now, but there are sites. There are people who scan the entire internet, right? So when there's a vulnerability, when there's a device that has some kind of opening that can be interfaced with, there are people who scan the entire internet and map out where every single one is. So Shodan is actually a search engine where you can search for this particular device, right? You talk about these Axis IP cameras. You can ask for, hey, what is every exposed, publicly accessible Axis IP camera that's out there on the web, right? And be able to connect to it, right? Maybe take it over, see what it sees, right? It's just, there's so much that's done for the attacker now to make that easier. You just don't have the luxury of not paying attention to security because the attackers are paying attention.
All right. So right there, that just scared me. but since you're, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I won't do it anymore.
All right.
All rainbows and Skittles from now on.
All right. But since you're a cybersecurity professional, what keeps you up at night?
People. Right. If you're doing this, if you own one of these businesses, people are both your biggest asset, right? But also one of your biggest vulnerabilities, because even if all your machines are set up as securely as possible, right? How can you guarantee that someone's not going to go into the trash bin of the email and click on some phishing scheme, right? People are unpredictable, and unfortunately, they're only individually unpredictable. In large numbers, that some percentage of people at an organization are going to click on that phishing scheme, which is why these things are so successful, right? They know even if it's a small percentage, someone is going to do it, right? So that's an issue, right? We can try training our folks up and making sure that they're aware and have buy-in, but it is incredibly hard to make sure that every single person in your organization makes the exact right decision every single time. And then there's math, right? I talked about, we talked about like the AES algorithm for one, and our guarantees of it just taking a really, really long time to find what these keys are, whatever your technique may be. But that again, and I'm not trying to scare you here, I promise, I'm not trying to scare you. It's secure as far as we know. Okay, so yes, the world's best mathematicians have been trying to find weakness of this, and they're incentivized to publish and let us know if there are issues, right? Obviously, that would be a huge deal, but it's totally possible that some well-resourced nation state that has their own group of cryptographers has found flaws, right? Actual structural flaws in some of these that we don't know about. It's possible. I'm not saying it's likely, but it's possible. And they wouldn't publish that. So right there, your guarantees of security, of privacy would completely go away.
As far as growth in the industry, which side, like I'm going back to the red team, the blue team, I guess, which side do you believe has the most growth potential? We hear about penetration testers that may do test your security. We hear about people that are supporting nation states. They're testing your security, but they want something else too.
Yeah.
And then you have your internal people that are trying to stop it all, right?
Right.
So what are your thoughts on that?
As far as what has the highest growth potential,
Right.
I mean both, right? There's I think there's an unending need for people with expertise on both sides, right? And even people who know, not someone who's just a red teamer or just a blue teamer, but someone who knows both sides. I think some people call what they do like purple teaming, right? We're kind of going back and forth. Um, we need people who can assess things offensively, but but when you're defending, you should know like what is possible, what can be done offensively that I need to defend against. And so we're always going to have people setting things up and need to like assess. Yes, you may think you've your network is perfectly secured and all your people are properly trained, but you'll never know unless you have a red team that's actually assessing it and trying to find those holes, find those cracks and weaknesses. And then you're always going to have opportunity on the blue side, defending, right? Because things like doing monitoring and whatnot are hard, right? People want automation there, and as things like AI and machine learning become bigger deals, and we find better ways of being able to incorporate those into the security, kind of this hunt and detection process. Those skills are going to be highly in demand as well. So I don't necessarily think you have to pick a side.
Okay.
That's my non-committal answer.
Okay. Good. All right. So, what recommendations do you have for young people looking to get into this field?
Okay. Awesome. I'm glad you asked that, because, obviously my business is education, right? And I invest in young people, day in and day out. And I can see the potential that there is in this field. I can see the opportunity that there is in, the computing field in general, right? But it all starts with, math, right? From a young age. If you know someone who's young, if you have access to a young person, right? Really express how important math and the ability to just kind of think through things and do problem solving really is. And maybe get them involved in some coding, clubs and things early on. As much as I teach, coding and computer, security topics to students, one of my recommendations, honestly, is that you should, the first time you see something, right, like code, should not be inside a classroom, right? It's a completely different paradigm. It's a completely different way of thinking, and and it takes a lot of creativity and whatnot. And you want to you want to try it out in somewhere where you have the space to fail, right? To experience that frustration, but still be able to overcome it. The analogy I've come up with kind of recently that I think is apt for this is, imagine the first time you ever picked up a crayon, right, was in an art class, right, and you were drawing something for a grade. How well would you do with that, right? I mean, no one's first drawing is going to be pretty, right? So you're going to get an F on the first thing you ever drew, and then you're going to think, man, I'm terrible at art, and no one would ever do it. And this is, I feel like this is kind of one of the problems that we have in programming, right? People take these programming classes and they're like, oh man, this is really hard, and and they think, well, this isn't for me, right? I just couldn't possibly do this. When the truth is, you need to do it in a less a lower stress, lower pressure kind of environment, and feel out what it takes to do it, and gain some experience. I taught myself from the time I was like 12 years old outside of a classroom. That's where I started learning how to program, how to write code. And by the time I ever actually got into a classroom doing it, it was really easy. So that's kind of what I recommend, right? Start with math. Oh yeah.
Quick question. What was your first programming language?
First programming language was TI Basic.
TI Basic.
TI
Okay.
Basic. I was programming my graphing calculator. Right? I think a TI-85 is the first one I had, right, for math class in, I don't know, 7th grade, and it blew my mind because someone had made like some game on it, you know, and I was like, what? You can do this? And it has a programming section, and I had no idea what programming was or anything, but I said, man, that would be awesome if I could make games on my calculator that I have to do here in school, and you know, and I could write programs that, you know, automatically solve problems for me, and it really set off this amazing passion, right? And it wasn't something I was being forced to do for a grade; it was something that I wanted to do. So yeah, understanding math, problem solving, a little bit about computers and how they're designed, a little bit about software and how it's produced, a little bit about how traffic traverses a network, right? So these are all some basic fundamental engineering principles you need, right? So you asked me before about reverse engineering for security, right? But before you do reverse engineering, right, you have to know engineering. So I think that's something I kind of want to leave people with, right? You got to learn the fundamentals. You got to have some expertise, some good firsthand knowledge of how things work, and then you can think about the security of them. Right? Because if you know how things work, then it's easier for you to realize how they wouldn't work.
All right, Dr. Dane. I have another question. Okay.
Yeah, please.
You've done what many people don't do, which is go beyond, you know, a bachelor's degree. What put you on that path of becoming a professor?
Oh, okay. So a little bit about me. When I finished at the academy, I actually had an opportunity. They take some people who've done well, who apply to do something called immediate graduate education. So before I even started my time as an officer, I went ahead and got my master's degree. I did that in a year out in Monterey. So that was awesome. But what that it also enabled me to do, right? I didn't know these things leading up. What that also enabled me to do was when I finished my first officer tour, I was able to come back to the Naval Academy as a teacher, because with a master's degree you can start teaching, and the timing was just perfect, right? I you know, I don't know who to thank for this, right? It was just a blessing to be in the right place at the right time. But you know, I've been here for about 10 years, right? And if you look back 10 years, that was when, you know, Stuxnet happened, right? As the first kind of like, you know, nation states kind of like cyber attack that was in the public consciousness. We in the US had just stood up US Cyber Command, right? So cybersecurity was getting a lot of attention in the military. And so here at the Academy, we needed a program to kind of infuse an understanding of the cybersecurity landscape in our young officers. So we started with creating 2 courses in it, one in computer science and one in electrical and computer engineering, which is where I was. So I helped to create those first couple of courses, right? I helped deliver the first course that they taken from computer science, and I was the main developer of the computer engineering course that they took. And so I was fortunate that, you know, that all went well, and we then needed to create a major. We now have a major in cybersecurity here, which is called cyber operations. So we were starting up a whole new department. So as I was transitioning out of the Navy, they wanted to hire me. So they actually gave me the opportunity to come here, you know, permanently and help create our cyber department, and along with that, sending me to get my Ph.D. You know, so this is something that like outside of even cybersecurity, I couldn't recommend more highly. I know this isn't like a financial podcast or anything directly, but you know, we talk about the student loan issues and crisis that's going on in America, and how difficult it is to get your education if you can't afford it. Well, there are places, right? Obviously, the government is one that has lots of programs like this, but there are places where you can do scholarship for service, right? Where you don't have to necessarily pay money, but you can work with a company and work that time back by you know, being an employee for a certain amount of time. So for here at the service academies, we get an undergraduate education for free by saying we're going to serve for another 5 years. But in that time, you're still making money as well, and you're not experiencing that debt that everyone has done. So I was fortunate to do that for both undergraduate, and I got to go to that immediate graduate program. And as we needed to stand up the cyber program here, they also sent me to get my Ph.D. and had that taken care of, right? And so the ability to start your life without having that kind of, that crushing debt that you're under, opens up a lot of doors and makes things a lot easier for you. So I just want to put that out there as one of the options of when you're thinking about how am I going to finance my education and open up those doors.
That's awesome right there. I mean, I know a lot of people who are definitely underneath a lot of debt from school. So yeah, that's definitely a great option for people to pursue. And we definitely talked about a range of topics involving cybersecurity, reverse engineering, but is there anything else that you want to share to the listening audience?
No, I think that was it. That was kind of the last point that I wanted to make. I'm cautious about being being a professor and just kind of like lecturing on and on and on and on. So yeah, if there's something specific you want me to talk about, sure. But yeah, I think I've made most of the points I wanted to, and I'm really grateful for you having me on and for this opportunity.
Thank you. This has been a great podcast.
Appreciate that.
Yes, dropping knowledge. I like it. Yes, but once again, we definitely appreciate you, Professor Dr. Dane Brown.
Oh, how can people reach out to you if you want that?
Yeah, I mean I'm on Twitter. You can find me on Twitter. Yeah, I guess that's probably one of the main ways. I should get like more ways of reaching out. You could go to the USNA website and find my information. But yeah, I'm more than happy to sit down and chat with people. Mentorship, obviously, I like working with young people, so that kind of thing is big for me.
Awesome. That wraps up this episode of the Disruptive Podcast by Minority Innovation Weekend. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe. Check us out online at www.minorityinnovationweekend.org and connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn.